This map is displayed throughout Australia. It is said to represent nation groups of Aboriginal Australia. It started as a record of tribes and language groups by Norman Tyndale. But language groups are not nations. It is also a map frozen in time. Tyndale mapped existing groups, but he didn't know what existed before. What likely happened in the early settlement of the Australian continent is that groups crossed from Indonesia and Papua New Guinea and slowly dispersed south all the way to Tasmania. Hunter-gatherers had little in common. No shared language and little knowledge of others until they bumped into them in search of food. First Nations is a Canadian term recently used in Australia. There was no nation until the Commonwealth of Australia was declared on the 1st of January 1901. There were bands, tribes and language groups before colonisation, but no nations. A tribe of the north had nothing in common with or little communication with people of the south, east or west. Different languages, no writing, no ability to store food or secure territory made the surrounds treacherous. When there was a drought, tribes had to enter someone else's country. Do you think the neighbours were welcoming?
Jackson Thomas in the 1840s in the Port Phillip district, Victoria. He had known a whole encampment of Aborigines to be thrown into a state of panic by the note of a bird or the croak of a frog a little out of tune, because it could signal another clan on the warpath. Sir Baldwin Spencer and Frank Gillen in the late 1890s. For a long time, the northern groups of the Unada tribe had been in fear of the Eora as they mounted a revenge operation to kill their foe.
One of the reasons the Australian continent remained tribal for thousands of years was that it was isolated from the rest of the world. Macassans visited from Indonesia, but Aborigines did not navigate the oceans. Australia's harsh climate limited the population to only a few 100,000 people, which meant that Australia had far fewer potential inventors to experiment with adopting innovations. Nations take time to build. They are a big jump from tribal life. China is a good case study. China is a nation. This is what it took to get there. About 7000 BCE, people learned to cultivate plants and domesticate animals for food, rather than rely solely on hunting and gathering. Australian Aborigines did not progress to the Neolithic stage of development. China did. China experienced 10 dynasties rising and falling for more than 3,000 years. The Shang dynasty, 1600 BCE, is the earliest dynasty in Chinese history. It was centred along the Yellow River Valley, the cradle of Chinese civilization. The Shang established a political system and succession that lasted thousands of years. However, the king's authority decreased as individual states grew more independent, wealthy, and powerful. States were at constant war for land and political control. Eventually, the state of Qin conquered all other states. It was China's first unified state. The first emperor created a central bureaucracy. Chinese coinage and writing became standardized. The first Great Wall was built. It didn't last. In 200 BCE, the Han dynasty reunified China after a civil war. China was now in control of the trading routes across Asia. Despite this, non-Chinese nomadic groups from the north constantly invaded. China would not be reunited for almost 250 years. The Tang dynasty built a more enduring state and a strong military. Tang secured peace and safety on overland trade routes, the Silk Road, that reached as far as Rome. Merchants, diplomats and pilgrims came from everywhere and brought new religions, ideas and cultures. Then in 1271, the leader of the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan, invaded and declared himself Emperor of China. It didn't last. The Ming dynasty came and went and was overthrown by Manchu invaders who took Beijing in 1644. Their history, language, culture and identity were distinct from the Chinese. More than 2,000 years of imperial rule ended with the creation of the Republic of China in 1912. An invasion by Japan and a civil war ultimately resulted in the founding of a communist-led government, the People's Republic of China, in 1949. The development of China, Japan, and all European nations was painful and slow. The people on the Australian continent experienced none of this. There was no surplus of any kind to feed armies or pay administrators, no writing, no trade, no agriculture, no industrial processes, until colonisation in 1788, which was partway through China's 10th dynasty. Nations are built on material and societal development. Nations offer more protection for tribes from relentless tribal warfare than they could guarantee under their arrangements. There were no such developments or guarantees in Australia. There were, of course, Aboriginal people, but there were no First Nations. There are no First Nations in Australia.